it's easy, I think, especially for me when I was younger, sometimes it's easy to move through the world kind of like maybe compromising a lot. And there's something to be said for having a real clear vision of like, this is what I'm into. And we were talking about expressivity in music too, having that sense of like, this is what I'm going for. I'm going to do it. And it's not for everybody necessarily.
Greetings, everybody. Keith Billick here, bringing you the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast, which, of course, is your one-stop shop for all the nerdiest banjo conversation and banjo information that you can handle. So if that's what you're looking for, you've come to the right place. Welcome in. You know, I actually got my hopes up. You regular listeners will know that oftentimes when the weather turns nicer, I like to record these things in my backyard studio. And like I said, I got my hopes up. The other day, I had an afternoon gig and came home with a sunburn from the 80-plus degree sun. And within 24 hours, it was snowing again. So thanks to the Michigan weather for dashing my hopes. Hopefully, I will get out to that famous suburban Detroit backyard studio very, very soon. But for now, it will have to be a much more common suburban Detroit basement type of episode. But you know who doesn't let me down is Daniel Miller. Daniel is today's Patreon supporter of the show. He hosts a bluegrass jam out on Cape Cod. So he, of course, is doing his part to promote the banjo proliferation into society here. And, of course, is doing his part by generously supporting the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. So, Daniel, thank you so much. It is much appreciated. And how do you become a supporter of the show? Well, I'm glad you asked. This is how. You go to patreon.com/banjopodcast and sign up to chip in just a couple dollars a month to help support the show, and it really does help. And you also get cool rewards as special thanks for your support. One of those rewards is you get invited to a monthly video hangout with me and your fellow listeners. That's the VIP, Very Important Picker Lounge. And this month's VIP lounge will be Wednesday, April 26th. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope you all can join me there. Once again, go to patreon.com/banjopodcast to find out more about that. Thanks also to the official sponsors of the show. That's Elderly Instruments, Peghead Nation, and Sullivan Banjos. Couldn't do it without all of you as well. And of course, you can always contact the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Today's featured guest is Ben Krakauer. Ben has a very creative and highly inventive banjo style, and I feel like Ben often gets a little overlooked because he's not in some big, successful touring band or anything like that, but those of us who have lived in the banjo world for a while are definitely admirers of his creativity and his unique sound. In fact, one of the coolest banjo moments of my life was witnessing about an hour-long 3-banjo jam with Ben, Chris Pandolfi, and Noam Pikelny. Now, Ben claims to not even remember that this happened, but it had a lasting impact on me, to say the least. I don't even think I could speak for an hour or two after witnessing that. In the meantime, Ben has kept busy getting a degree in ethnomusicology, studying music in far-off places, which you will hear about, and is now a professor of traditional arts and music down at Warren Wilson College. He has now released 2 albums of his original instrumental music in recent years, the first of which was already discussed on this podcast for a freshly picked episode some time ago, and the most recent one, called Hidden Animals, just came out, and we will be discussing that along with stories about his background, his career, touring with David Grisman, and much more. So give a warm Picky Fingers welcome to Ben Krakauer.
I currently live in Swannanoa, North Carolina for the most part. My partner's in Philadelphia, so I'm in Philly a lot also, but Western North Carolina. And I got into banjo when I was 15. My friends already played guitar. I wanted to play something. Like my older brother was playing guitar and he was sounding really good coming home from college and sort of showing what he was learning about improvisation on the electric guitar. And I thought that was really cool. But my friends already played guitar and I had some banjo recordings I liked a lot. There is a recording of Pete Seeger doing this song called Talking Union, which is like a Woody Guthrie type, like, pro-labor song with Clawhammer banjo that I liked a lot. And a Doc and Merle album that my dad had picked up that had the one called Down South that had Merle playing banjo on Twin Sisters. So again, Clawhammer banjo. And then I connected with this local teacher named Bill Gurley, who's this amazing musician, he's become a great friend and mentor and stuff. And he was like, well, I play bluegrass banjo. So check out Earl Scruggs, check out Tony Trischka. And he pointed me out to different, he suggested different stuff for me to check out. And it was just great. I mean, I just, was all for it. It was just really, really fun once I started taking lessons with him.
Now, did you already say how old you were when that was happening?
I was 15.
Okay, right on. And so banjo was your first instrument?
Sort of. I did, all the kids do like recorder and stuff like that at school at some point. I did trombone for a couple weeks and it didn't stick. But I actually did fife. I played fife because I'm from Williamsburg. So I was in the boys like fife and drum corps. It was all boys back then.
Interesting.
And so I did that for a couple of years and actually made some money with it. They paid us minimum wage to do that.
Wow.
But then I quit, and then after a couple of years, got into banjo.
Right on. So what kind of, you said we're hearing the Seeger and the Doc and Merle stuff, which is largely like singer-songwritery for the most part. What do you think it was about the sound of the banjo that made you want to participate in it like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I just know my friends and I or one friend in particular, we were like playing video games after school. Like, people of a certain generation were going to recognize this kind of thing. Like you get home from school and have snacks and play video games and we'd listen to music. And we both had listened to some of that kind of stuff. Like Pete Seeger in particular, we both had listened to that when we were growing up. So in addition to everything else we were listening to, some of that got in the rotation. And it just sounded so, just the tone of the banjo. I mean, I don't know. It just sounded so cool and just so different, just such a rich sound. I mean, the same things we love about banjo now, it just has such a rich character to it. It's like a really like a rich character to it. So something about that drew me in. That song Talking Union, it's one of these songs that has this like 1-4-5 progression. There's just something about that. I mean, 1-4-5 is great. We played bluegrass music, like this, just that, like that tonality and the banjo sound over that. And then, and this tune on the Doc and Merle album was this tune called Twin Sisters, which is like one of these, what we call like modal, fiddle tunes. The banjo's probably in that sawmill tuning where you have the like G, but with your B string up to C. And that's still like one of my favorite sounds for fiddle tunes. And on both of my albums, I've got a couple tunes written in that tonality because, so I think the tone of the instrument and just the types of music that, I was hearing it with, I just love those sounds.
And where did you start with you once you hooked up with, did you say his name was Bill?
Yeah, Bill Gurley. Yeah.
What kind of stuff were you working on with him and how quickly did you develop into, maybe something that we would more recognize as you're playing today?
Yeah, well, he had a really great teaching methodology in that it was like, here's something, have it memorized next week and let's play it together or trade lead and backup. I guess that's pretty standard for, how a lot of banjo teachers teach, but he definitely had that expectation that like, have it memorized, let's play it. And he would like push the tempo. So like he'd play guitar and I'd play banjo and he'd push me past my comfort zone, which is, that's when I teach, I tend to get people playing real slow. I just want them to play accurate, play real slow, get it dialed in, speed up later. But one thing I appreciate from him, which I'd like to incorporate more, this, he'd be like, great, sounds good. Okay, here we go. And he'd push it off really fast. And that was it's kind of like the experience you get when you go to a jam session or if you're on stage and someone kicks it off fast. So that was good learning experience. And he taught me a lot of bluegrass stuff, but he was from like, he was from that sort of like 70s, like newgrass scene. So, and in fact, the band, some of your listeners, I'm sure know Cloud Valley, this band that Bill Evans played in. Bill Gurley wrote a lot of songs that they recorded. So he was part of that same kind of scene. And he played on a gig or two with Trishka back in the day, like, because he's a multi-instrumentalist. He does guitar and banjo and fiddle. So he was like turning me on to telling me to check out Old and the Way because I think he knew I'd like that stuff. And then later he chastised me for listening to them too much because my banjo playing. I mean, I love Jerry's banjo playing. I think he's an awesome banjo player, but I remember him giving me crap at one point about, I needed to stop listening to quite so much Jerry Garcia banjo playing.
Do you think he perceived that what was his issue with that, I wonder? Was there something about Jerry's playing that you were mimicking that was maybe undesirable, or what was the deal with that?
That's a good question. I mean, when I think of Jerry's playing, I think of it like he kind of pops he'd use different fingers, I guess. For him, it probably would have been his ring finger, but for us, it would have been like our middle finger. He kind of pops that middle finger a lot. So it's less of like the even roll that you get with like, obviously Scruggs is like the epitome of that super even kind of articulation. But even like Crow and later players, it's still like you're not popping the middle finger quite as much. What's interesting though is that when I studied more hardcore, like driving bluegrass playing, the player who I was attracted to was Sammy Sheeler. And he's another person who does pop his middle finger quite a lot. Like I would say a little more than the other fingers. He doesn't sound like Jerry Garcia, but yeah.
So let me stop you there. I think I know what you mean by popping the middle finger. Do you mean like just, you mean popping the timing of it?
I think more of a volume thing. Like,
oh, okay.
So like that kind of like, like that, that, I guess that one lick in particular, everybody plays that lick, but I think of Jerry's banjo playing as just being full of that kind of articulation where you're just really drawing out that middle finger a lot.
Yeah, a lot of first string action.
Exactly.
Is kind of what you hear.
And maybe playing it louder than the others. So as opposed to the Earl thing where like every note is like hyper articulated, that is so driving, that really drives a band. It's like a metronome too. The Jerry thing is a little more, exactly, just like a louder, more active first string. And there's nothing bad about that. It's just a sound. And I think my teacher was saying like diversify, listen to more different types of things. But yeah, so he was teaching me a lot of Scruggs arrangements and a lot of melodic style arrangements. Like he had stuff tabbed out, so what's that Alan Mundy tune? Molly Bloom. I remember he had that, and Bill Cheatham, and all this kind of standard melodic stuff a lot of banjo players learn. And he taught me Opus 57, the Grisman instrumental, which, it works. Bill Keith recorded that with Mule Skinner. So he also turned me on to Mule Skinner. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that 70s stuff. And also Hartford, I remember he taught me, Gentle on My Mind. So he definitely kind of turned me on to a lot of the bluegrass that ended up being my favorite bluegrass. Like even now, I mean, when I listen to bluegrass music, my favorite stuff tends to be like Kentucky Colonels, like Living in the Past or Live in Sweden, or, I mean, Old and in the Way is awesome. I love hearing Vassar on that stuff and Grisman in that. I mean, all of them. It's really fun to listen to that. But anyway, you're asking me how my own style sort of grew out of that context of those initial lessons.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, what did you take from those lessons that you think were important elements of whatever you consider you're playing now to be? And I have some of my own ideas, but I would love to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I mentioned, so first of all, just the kind of listening that my teacher was pointing me towards, the 70s newgrass stuff, and also Trishka in particular. Like he really liked Trishka and encouraged me to get a lesson and go to a camp where Trishka was teaching. And Tony Trishka is like so expressive and joyful in his banjo playing. Is so much personality. So I think that it was always just kind of like a model for me of like how you could just be when it's, you know, when it's that format of like people are taking solos and kind of expressing themselves, kind of having Tony Trischka in mind as a model for like, you make it whatever you want to make it. Like, and I remember I went for a lesson with him. It was crazy. My parents let me do this. But when I was like 17, I think they let me borrow their car and drive from Eastern Virginia to Northern New Jersey, just like by myself. And I checked into a hotel. And then in the morning I got like a 2-hour lesson from Tony and I drove back.
Whoa, and big banjo adventure for the teenager. That's great.
I'm really glad they let me do it. And it was an amazing lesson. And I remember one of the things that came out of it was I recorded, you know, of course, the little cassette tape. I recorded Tony, or he recorded for me. He played John Hardy, and he played it, you know, probably 10 or 12 times through with all these variations. And I remember just being just like the coolest thing ever. Like, whoa, like you can do all that stuff over this tune, John Hardy. You can do so many different things. So I think that made a big impression. And then also like my teacher, Bill, like he would, when I'd see him play, he'd always have me come up and play with him, even when I was like at a very basic level, him and his wife, Pam. And so I think just playing with him and hearing how he was such a, you know, he would really drive so much on guitar and banjo. Like, I think when I play bluegrass, like I tend to like maybe take that part seriously of like, let's just like push a lot of energy into it. Like maybe physically, sometimes I want to relax on my instrument and relax personally while I'm playing. But when it comes to like creating the sound, this idea of like, let's go, you know, like that right. Kind of intensity that, you know, a lot of our favorite bluegrass musicians bring to it. I definitely got that from my teacher. So that's something I try to do when I play that music.
That makes sense. And I think it is notable that you were drawn to like the expressiveness of Tony. And in my mind, I think that's probably why you were drawn also to Jerry, because I think maybe a lot of criticism of Jerry's playing is similar to the criticism of his guitar playing. Like it's not quite as technically perfect as so many other people, but it is very expressive.
Yeah.
So I think that it sounds like that's a pattern for you in terms of what you've been drawn to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's another side of this that I'm sure we'll get into eventually in this interview, but definitely one of the sort of poles that I'm drawn to in music is that kind of like expressivity thing, especially when it's the context of people kind of passing around solos, you know? But another big experience for me, like big formative thing was after a couple of years, I feel like it took me a couple of years before I really started going to these different festivals and things. But I remember after I'd been playing for maybe 2-3 years and started going to like Merle Fest every year. And that wasn't, you know, it felt far away at the time, but in hindsight, it's like, you know, 5 hours away, so it's not that far. And I even got to go to Telluride pretty early on, which is really amazing. Cool. And at those things, seeing, I guess what they call them, like the Bluegrass All-Stars, you know, Bela Fleck and all the, like Sam Bush and Tony Rice and Jerry Douglas.
House Band, I think is what they call it. Yeah.
Telluride House Band, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot more to say about that crowd and how what an impact that stuff made. But specifically talking banjo and my style, I think I remember hearing Bela Fleck play 9-Pound Hammer at Telluride and like doing a single. I wouldn't have probably known to call it single string back then, but hearing him do a single string solo for it and just and not even like, I'd listen to jazz on the radio and like we had Miles Davis Kind of Blue album around the house. So I'd listen to like some jazz, but I didn't really like know, like I just kind of had a sense of it. But I remember hearing Bela play on 9-Pound Hammer and just being like, whoa, like he's playing jazz over bluegrass and thinking that, and it just seemed, again, this expression thing, it just seemed like he was free to like express whatever he wanted to over the framework of this song. And I think that was just, I just thought that was awesome. And I think that in addition to like, I was flat picking guitar because I took lessons from the same guy who taught me banjo, taught me guitar. My brother played guitar too. So we'd pick together and we'd do all the Norman Blake, Doc Watson, Tony Rice kind of stuff. And awesome. Tony Rice was and is just like one of my very, very, very favorite, you know, musicians to hear. And of course, the drama of seeing him live too, when he'd wear all that jewelry and he'd have his suits on, he just was so cool. You know what I mean? Yeah, and like, you're just like, oh my God, Tony's here. And you can't wait to hear what he's going to do. And his guitar just comes like rumbling through the PA.
Yeah.
So I think
a presence.
Yeah, such a presence. So I think being into what Tony did and then hearing Bela create those similar like melodic lines out of a closed position on the banjo, that made an impression on me and made me think like, okay, well, like, you know, how maybe that closed position stuff will help me be able to create some of the sounds I want to create.
Oh, I would love to dig way into this with you. I guess backing up just a step, did you already have a concept of improvising kind of along this line of developing an expressive type of playing? Were you already, even before maybe this single string awakening that you had, were you already improvising, and how did you approach that, or how did Bill teach you to do that?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, the reason why I wanted to play an instrument was hearing my brother come back from college, having taken jazz guitar lessons and like improvising on his Strat. And to me, that was just the coolest thing that a person could improvise. So that's kind of what made me want to play a stringed instrument to begin with. And then it became banjo. So it was always improvising was like a big thing for me. It was a big interest of mine. I think the way I learned how to do it was I went to this camp called Common Ground on the Hill, which is it's in Maryland, I think Westminster, Maryland or something, or Chester, I can't remember. But Walt Michaels is he's a hammer dulcimer player and guitar player who used to play with Bill Gurley in the 70s, and he's part of that whole 70s like scene. But anyway, he runs the thing. And I went there I studied there with Tony Chishka the first year I went, and with Bill Keith the next 1 year. Maybe I went 2 more years and studied with Bill, but it would be like the late night jams, going to the jams. And so Mike Aldridge taught dobro there. So there were like a million dobro players there, and all the dobro cats were like running the jams. And I just remember
there were a million dobro players there.
There were a million dobro players. Yeah.
How is that possible? Like, is it just because Mike was there?
Because Mike was there. Yeah.
Dobro is always like the least represented of all the instruments.
It's really cool. Funny. Yeah.
That just caught my ear. I've never heard that before.
It's really funny. Okay. Yeah. But so
Sorry, go ahead.
That's right. And so, yeah, I think I just kind of hurled myself at the solos when I had to take a solo for a tune I didn't know. It was just like, okay, fingers, like, let's go. And just, you know, okay, play C stuff, play D stuff, play G stuff. And I think in hindsight, like if I had a recording that, it probably sounded like totally awful, like not like something you'd ever choose to listen to. But I think as like a 15, 16, even like 17-year-old kid, like I think I just kind of was like comfortable with just doing that in a way that as we get older, it's like we're a little more inhibited. But and it's also a gendered thing. You know, I feel like as boys, sometimes you kind of get a little more license to just kind of throw yourself at something and be gnarly and see how it goes. And it's okay if it doesn't sound like really nice. And I remember even one of the teachers told me later, Guy Davis is this awesome blues guitar player and like storyteller and stuff. I think he told me later that he had mentioned me in one of his classes as like, and I think essentially his point was this kid sounds terrible, but he's giving it his all and he's throwing himself in and he's learning how to do it on the go. I mean, I don't think he would have said the word terrible, but
kind of a backhanded compliment either way. Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. But, and I still admire that when I go to camps and festivals and you hear young kids just like throwing themselves at the music, like, I mean, what a great way to learn. If the people around you can tolerate it.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, I'm a big fan of being willing to make some mistakes and also being then gracious of other people being willing to make mistakes.
Exactly. I feel the same way.
I mean, how did you, I guess going forward to the single string stuff, how did you then work on that? You are now like a really skilled single string player. I think it's probably one of the like distinctive qualities of your playing is the way that you utilize that. How did you develop that? How do you work on it? Maybe even how do you work on it now to sound the way you do?
I work on it a ton. And I think, well, actually, if I go back one bit, back in the same time when I was initially learning banjo, I also took some jazz guitar lessons. And most of my experience with the jazz guitar lessons was having to read music, which is so painfully slow for me. But the thing that I got, so that was really hard. And it actually kind of turned me off of even wanting to read music because it just felt like too much labor. But I remember the first thing that teacher showed me, or maybe like the only thing I even really learned from him back then, was the modes, you know, the 7 modes of like a major scale. And so I think early on I had this idea of like, oh, like if you can really learn your scales in different positions and understand the different modes, that will free you up as an improviser. So I always kind of had that idea. And then when I went to college, I took jazz improv lessons with this great trumpet player named John Dirth, and also with a jazz guitar player named Mike Rosinski. And again, it was a lot of this thing of like, practice all these different technical things, and then it will filter into your playing, and that's how you become an improviser. You know, that's one school of thought around it. But maybe I'm not answering your initial question.
It's funny that you say that, because on a personal level, I'm at a crossroads between practicing a lot of technical things, hoping they will filter into my playing, and what I've come to find is the way they filter into my playing sounds like I'm playing a bunch of scales and stuff.
Yeah, see, that's the thing.
And so there's a way to like bridge a certain gap into turning that into like what we keep talking about, the expressive type of playing.
Right.
Do you have anything to say about how you've done that, or how one could be able to do that?
Yeah. So I think to me, where music comes alive is in rhythm and tone. And I know they always tell that to us. They always say it's the 3 T's, you know, taste, timing, and tone. And I feel like taste is the one that everyone's going to have their own taste. So like as a teacher, I would try not to be too kind of didactic about this is what's good, this is what's bad. I mean, students going to listen, follow their own ears. The way you teach taste is maybe just teach people to listen and pay attention to what they like, or what feels good, or what sounds good to them. But timing and tone, I mean, yeah, there's so much. So anyway, so for me, when I pick up a banjo to practice now, it's always just right hand stuff for the first while. So just kind of like, and all I'm doing is forward roll kind of pattern. And I'm kind of dialing in the timing, dialing in the tone, and also just getting comfortable in my body with it, and also I'll have a metronome going usually. So I'll choose that tempo that feels good, and I'll feel it first, and then I'll tap it in on the metronome. So I'll feel it first, tap it in, so the metronome is set in that place that I'm already feeling. And then once that's dialed in, that's when I'll begin. And after a while is when I'll begin whatever scale or harmony stuff as part of practice. So that way it's not like scales and harmony just in like a vacuum. It's like you've already got this kind of groove happening, or this almost like a vibe. You've already set a tone, and whatever's going to happen at that point is a little more musical. So maybe if I've got, and then maybe, you know, I just went, I'm in that position that probably a lot of people know, where your index finger's at the 5th fret on the 4th string, playing a G major scale. So that's all on the 4th string. That's all on the 3rd string. And then I just hit one note on the 2nd string, that F sharp, and then I'm back on the 1st string. So it's all just one position. And I just went up that. I just did that, but I already kind of had some time that I was feeling. So then when I practiced it, it was like more of a musical thing to practice. So I think that's, for me, that's kind of the answer. Whatever harmonic thing, whatever scale thing it is, the rhythm and the tone thing is going to get dialed in first in my practice, and then I'll introduce that other thing to where it feels like music.
So it seems like there's an element of improvisation even within something that you approach as just sort of a scale exercise.
I'd say so, yeah. And I mean, it's not always like that. Like sometimes I'll be like, you know, I'll decide it'll be, you know, I'll just run that pattern. And there it's maybe not improvising, but it's still listening. It's still with the metronome. Like I'm really focusing on how locked up am I with the metronome, or maybe I'll even put the metronome on some tricky kind of a setting. So I have to focus really hard to stay with it. And I'm listening really carefully to my right hand, to my tone. Like, is this the sound I want to be making? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's easy when you practice technical stuff to make it hyper cerebral, you know, to make it all about thinking. And I try to make my practice time about listening and feeling, and introduce the thinking in like, almost like picture myself, if you're practicing for yourself, picture yourself as like a little 5-year-old kid who you have to entertain. So you're not just going to be like, practice your free throws, practice dribbling with your left hand. You're not just going to drill them. It's going to be fun. It's going to be games. It's going to be making sure they're like kind of getting breaks or having fun or enjoying it. And I think that's how I treat myself when I'm practicing. It's like, it's got to be fun. It's got to be kind of holistic.
That's really cool. The way I became aware of your playing was seeing Old School Freight Train do these like guerrilla pop-up showcases like at IBMA and stuff like that. Is it skipping too far ahead in your career or your past to pick up maybe with that band and talk about that for a bit?
That sounds great.
Were they the first real group that you had like as a serious band with your playing, and how did that get started, and what was that band all about? Give us the rundown.
Yeah, so not to go too far back, but there were a couple groups before that. There was I played with the mandolin player from that band, actually, Pete Frostick, and my good friend from growing up, Evan Morse, on fiddle, and my brother Mark on guitar. We played in a band that had a couple of names. I think we called ourselves Tidewater Bluegrass Band at one point, or Tidewater Bluegrass Band. And we played gigs in Virginia Beach and at like a local like pub place in Williamsburg. So that was like, but that wasn't like, I guess that wasn't like a serious, like, we had our local things. And then when I went to college, there was this band called Walker's Run, which was Brandon Gilmore on mandolin. And I feel like people, your listeners, would have heard of, because they've had iterations over the years. But that band, we would play bar gigs and frat party gigs and stuff like that around Central Virginia. And they were like, I would say that was kind of a serious band in the sense that it had that competitive thing that shows up in a lot of bluegrass, which is like, people, you can have different feelings on competition, on like when it's healthy and when it's not, or when you'd seek it out or not. But for better or worse, that band had that thing happening. So I think...
Do you mean competition within members, like outdoing each other solos? Or, okay.
Or even like, I'm going to kick this off so fast and see if you can play with me kind of thing. I don't think I ever really loved that, but it was part of that. And it was also kind of, that's sort of a training ground in a way to have that kind of experience. And as a banjo player, that band did a lot of stuff in minor keys. So I think specifically when I was getting into the single string stuff, it was like, how am I going to take these solos in A minor on like, there's a tune called, I think, Elzic's Farewell or something, and A minor. Yeah. And I'm like, how am I going to like really make that sound good? Because I didn't know enough cool like Scruggs kind of style or even melodic style to make that sound very good. So I was like, oh, I'll figure out how to do my Tony Rice licks on the banjo, or not like note for note, but like the closed position. So anyway, but you're asking about Old School Freight Train. So,
that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good to get up to speed. I used to really dig that band. I had your guys. Was there only one album from Old School Freight Train?
We did a few. So we did. Okay. I don't remember. We did a live at Ashland album. We did Run, which is the one the acoustic disc and Grisman produced. We did one independent one before that. It was just self-titled. And then we did a whole bunch of those Pickin' On albums. Like that was kind of a gig for us that we would record the various Pickin' On albums.
I forgot about that. Yeah. That's cool. Hey folks, just need to take a quick break to tell you all about my good friends up in Lansing, Michigan at Elderly Instruments. Now you might be thinking that with Elderly's amazing selection and their fast worldwide shipping that they are some big box conglomerate store. But no, Elderly has been family owned since 1972, and they pride themselves on giving you the customer service and personal touch that only a mom and pop store can give you. So the next time you need anything for your banjo, guitar, violin, mandolin, any stringed instruments, accessories, instructional materials, and I'm talking about whether you're looking for a beginner instrument or even a high-end, vintage, hard-to-find item, Elderly's going to have you covered. It's my first place that I go. So check them out at elderly.com, and don't forget to let them know that the Piggy Fingers Banjo Podcast sent you. This podcast is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, a site that brings you streaming video courses in banjo, guitar, mandolin, fiddle, dobro, upright bass, and ukulele. You can learn bluegrass, old time, and plenty of other roots music styles from some of the most talented players and instructors in the world. Now, some of what Peghead Nation offers is a great lineup, of course, of banjo instruction. Check out these courses: Beginning Banjo with Bill Evans, Bluegrass Banjo with Bill Evans, Clawhammer Banjo with Evie Layden, Wade Ward Style Banjo with Bruce Molsky, The Banjo According to Danny Barnes, and Contemporary Bluegrass Banjo with Wes Corbett. Now, regardless of what course you choose, you're going to get high-quality multi-angle video lessons, downloadable notation and tab, play-along tracks, and plenty of tunes to play. Now, perhaps the best part of all this is that just by being a Picky Fingers podcast listener, you are going to get your first month free. Just go to pegheadnation.com and use the promo code PickyFingers at checkout. That's PickyFingers, all lowercase, all one word, over at pegheadnation.com. Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is proud to welcome a brand new sponsor, Sullivan Banjos. The Sullivan family has been in the banjo making business for decades and have earned their reputation for the highest quality in materials and craftsmanship. Perhaps the best part is you get the big-time Sullivan tone while getting the personal customer service of a small boutique banjo custom shop. Chances are that if you can dream it, Eric Sullivan can build it. My main banjo is proof. I've been playing and loving my Sullivan custom banjo since 2004, and it just keeps getting better and better every day. So hop online and go to sullivanbanjos.com, email them at sullivanbanjo@gmail.com, or get a hold of them the old-fashioned way. Pick up the phone and dial 502-365-5022. And don't forget to tell them that Keith from the Picky Fingers podcast sent you. So what was like was there a certain philosophy for that band? Because I remember probably hearing it now, it wouldn't sound that strange, but I think at the time that was actually like a fairly progressive sounding band, I think. What was your guys' approach, and how did you maybe grow as a player within that philosophy?
Yeah, so that was it was Pete Frostick on mandolin, Jesse Harper on guitar and vocals, and Daryl Muller on bass and vocals, and then at first Anne-Marie Simpson or Anne-Marie Calhoun on fiddle, but then after she left, then Nate Leith on fiddle. So that was so fun playing with all of them, and I mean I smiled when I said Nate because he especially was just like so fun to play with him on stage, but yeah, I guess in the initial days when it was just the four of us, Pete and I were more coming from bluegrass, and Daryl and Jesse were more into like, I guess like jazz and kind of soul and like, you know, songwriter stuff, and they were both into like salsa and like Afro-Cuban music, because remember that movie, The Buena Vista Social Club, that came out? Like,
oh sure, yeah, that
was a big thing. And also even the Grisman Quintet in the 90s was that with Joe Craven and Enrique Coria on guitar, so it was kind of like more like Latin oriented version of the Grisman Quintet. So like, and those guys were both into like Stevie Wonder and stuff. So I think a lot of the initial thing of the band was like, this is probably an oversimplification, but maybe Pete and I maybe teaching them a little bit more about bluegrass or pointing them in certain directions with bluegrass, and then them teaching us or pointing us in certain directions with the stuff that was more like jazz or Latin or pop kind of. And that sort of remained the dynamic in that band over the years. I mean, we both got into the other side of that equation, but I would say towards the end of my time with the band, I was definitely into the weird instrumental stuff and not as into like playing like the pop oriented stuff, you know. But it was all good, and it was a tremendous learning experience. I mean Jesse is such a great he executes so well. Like he'll learn something and just plays it with just tone and timing and just totally executes it in such a beautiful way. So that was like, I would say that lifted up Pete and I both to try to like match that as best we could. And Daryl on bass, just playing with a really great bass player and hearing how bass works in these different genres of music, I would say that was a really, really influential thing for me as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And how did you guys get hooked up with Grisman? And what was that like?
So our manager at the time, Ann Kingston, I think just on a whim, she sent a demo that we made to Harriet Rose, you know, who's Grisman's one of the people who worked at Acoustic Disc. And she actually listened to it and sent it, or maybe Artie Rose listened to it, and then they sent it to Dog, and he listened to it and wanted to work with us. So it was like a dream come true. We couldn't believe it, you know.
What was his role? Was producing an album, and then you did some touring with him too, is that right?
Right. He produced the album. He even played on one track, and Joe Craven from his band played on a couple tracks, and then we toured with him, and the format was that Old School Freight Train was the opening act, and then for his act we were like his band. So that was pretty incredible. Dang. And he basically told us like, whatever of my music you want to learn, we'll play that. So we got to choose anything that was his own original stuff. And that was really fun. So we did a bunch of shows like that, probably like the CD release shows in 2005. And then we kept doing stuff with him into 2006. And those were probably more like old school opening and then his own quintet as the headliner. But that was all really, really, really cool opportunities.
Maybe it's testing your memory too much, but what were some, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to get at what the process was like of preparing Dog's music to actually play with him. Like, that's pretty daunting. And I guess I'm just wondering, like, did you have any particular challenges that you were able to maybe solve, or what was surprising about trying to learn his music as a banjo player? Because there's not really banjo on any of his records, I don't think. At least not any of his like DGQ records.
Right. Like there is some of the early stuff of like Bill Keith playing on Opus 57 or something.
Some of it. Yeah, never mind. Yeah.
But you're right, for the most part not. So the thing was that we had already been playing so much of his music anyway. Like just because from the beginning when we formed, like we pretty much loved his whole catalog from like the earlier stuff with Tony Rice and that DGQ 20 album, the 3 discs album, you know, we loved all that stuff. So, and when we would do private gigs like weddings or whatever, and we weren't playing our own original music, we'd do a lot of Dog covers anyway. So a lot of it was kind of building off of what we already were doing. And you know, you and I have been talking about the single string thing a lot. I mean, I definitely ended up using single string as kind of my default for playing his melodies because, you know, for the simple reason that sometimes it's more labor intensive to come up with the melodic style version. And sometimes it's a little more like, let me get the notes and I can do it single string style. Sometimes it's just faster.
Is there anything that you can remember that you feel like you learned from Dog? Maybe not necessarily music and this is how you play this tune, but just about being in a professional atmosphere or just whatever the vibe was that he had. What do you feel like you took away from that experience as a whole?
That's a good question. I mean, I think on the musical, it's kind of actually the same answer for both sides of the equation, but on the musical level, like when you play with him, it's just like, there's David Grisman. Like he just knew who he was, you know, he knows who he is musically. And he has such a strong, clearly articulated sound and voice. So I think that thing, and it's powerful. It's powerful, but it's also like when he's going for the sensitive and small dynamic thing, it's not like he's doing some halfway version of it. He's all in for, you know, dynamic, romantic little tremolo, whatever it is. Like he's all in for that thing. And I think same thing, just hanging around him and seeing his lifestyle, like going to his house and he's got all these awesome old instruments around everywhere. And like when we were on the road with him, he'd take us to some, you know, I remember we were in Philadelphia and he took us to this like Italian restaurant, you know, and like he just really was, he knew what he was into and he would just kind of lean into those things that he was about. And, it's easy, I think, especially for me when I was younger, sometimes it's easy to move through the world kind of like maybe compromising a lot. And there's something to be said for having a real clear vision of like, this is what I'm into. This is, you know, and we were talking about expressivity in music too, having that sense of like, this is what I'm going for. I'm going to do it. And it's not for everybody necessarily, you know?
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. So what happened next? I know that you ended up, I really want to get into some of this ethnomusicology and some of the studies that you've done abroad. Was that like the next big chapter for you?
More or less. Around the time I left Old School Freight Train at the end of 2006, but a big thing for me in 2005 was we played at Wintergrass and I met Tristan and Tashina Claridge and all these like young kids who they were kind of mentoring, who were all, you know, all these people are kind of like famous now, but meeting all those young, like, you know, Dominic and Jake Jolliffe and all these people when they were like kids, and Alex Hargraves, like it was really inspiring for me going from playing with a touring band to like being around the more kind of like the camp scene and just how kind of fresh it all was among those young people and the people who were into like organizing and teaching at camps. Like it was just all about creative process and fun and jamming. So that was like, that was really a cool time. So then I ended up, you know, going to that. There's a music camp that Tristan and Tashina Claridge ran in Mount Shasta, California that I'd go to every year and teach it at. But I'd be teaching, but I'd also just be learning so much. Like Billy Contreras would be there and like I would just learn so much from him. And I still, like I got a couple lessons from him recently. I still learned so much from him. So I think that was impactful. and around the same time, I was kind of burning out of touring and performing so much. And yeah, so then I quit Old School at the end of 2006, and then I guess did more stuff with like, the Claridges, in that year. But then I guess by 2008, I was going to grad school for ethnomusicology, and just kind of, I think I was just wanting to lean back into the like learning thing more, like less about like, let me get out there and perform all the time, and more just like wanting to learn more. And so eventually that the shape that the focus all of that took was to learn more about this type of music from West Bengal, India, called Baul music or Baul Fakir music, which is, I guess you could call it like a folk tradition. It's community of musicians who play it. The songs are like kind of like spiritual and religious songs. The instruments that are used are, there's an instrument that sounds a lot like banjo that's called dotara. And the musicians are just really, the people who I met were just so just accessible and just like fun people to be around. So that was a whole chapter of its own. I lived in West Bengal for a year in 2012 and 13, and just got to meet a lot of really amazing people. And one thing that was cool about that experience is that I only had a fiddle with me. I didn't bring a banjo for that whole year.
That's it. You're off the podcast. That's disqualifying.
But ever since then, I've just been so fired up about it. Like that year, I was like, I'm going to travel with a fiddle. It's small. And then ever since that year, it's just been like, it's been like I'm 15 again with the banjo, and just, it's just the thing I want to be doing all the time,
Real quick before I forget to ask, you said the instrument that sounds somewhat banjo-esque, dotar? Is that what you said it was called?
Yeah, dotara. So Dotara. It's the very same thing. Yeah, it's wood, wood with a head on it, 4 strings.
I'm endlessly fascinated by music from other cultures and things. Like I'm happy to listen to anything that you have to share about what are some elements of that music, maybe even elements that you've been able to incorporate into your style, or I don't even know what to ask because I'm not familiar with it, but
yeah,
I would love to hear all about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the things that come to mind are like probably a lot of your listeners know about like raga, right? Like in classical music from South Asia, and this idea of like essentially kind of like a mode or almost like a scale, but there's certain tones there's certain things that might be flat or they might be sharp, whether you're ascending or descending, and it's got this whole mood to it. And there's not chord changes happening, but this whole piece is taking shape from that collection of notes and the way they work together. So this type of music I was studying, it wasn't a classical tradition, but it operated in that same way. I guess a really big thing that probably has like made a big impression on my music is a lot of the music they play is in 6/8. But it's like the way they articulate 6/8 is very different than like the kind of, I think we think 6/8 and we often think of like jigs and like a lot of like Irish and Scottish music and stuff.
It's like in 2 basically.
Yeah. And that's true with this, that, you kind of like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But like a lot of the way they might articulate that is like, so it's like different emphases, and it's still more, I mean, it's pushing and pulling a little bit, but it's more or less within that 6/8 grid. Dadra Tal is the name of like the name for that rhythm. But before I got into that, I was studying some West African drumming with this great teacher from Ghana, Nani Agbeli, who was teaching at Tufts. So I was in an ensemble that he taught, and there was also a lot of stuff in that kind of 12/8 feel. 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I first heard the Bengali stuff, I was like, oh, it reminds me of the West African thing, because it had some similar syncopations happening. And then, and I think, so anyway, that all that stuff I think has made a big impression, and definitely is stuff I've practiced and shows up in my playing in different ways.
Even on your new album, isn't there one that's kind of in that time signature. I haven't got to listen to it too many times, so I'm sort of just going from memory, but I seem to remember hearing that.
Yeah, the second tune on the album is called On Hold, and it kind of sounds a little bit, I guess it sounds a little bit Celtic-y, but yeah, it's in that time signature, and that's, it's kind of made an imprint on me. So when I'm in 6/8, those are a lot of the rhythms that are just kind of coming up a lot for me. And of course in jazz too, like in jazz, a lot of times, like I'm thinking about Elvin Jones and some of, like, a lot of times the same kind of that 12/8 feel shows up a lot in the way that jazz players are approaching 4/4. So that's a big thing. And like hip hop too, a lot of hip hop that some artists I like to listen to do a lot in that feel. So all these like really novel ways of approaching, 6/8, or even if you're in 4/4, bringing that triplet feel in and then moving the triplets in ways that feel really cool.
Do you have any ways of demonstrating that to put you on the spot?
Yeah. Even just like I mentioned the right hand thing as a warm up. Let me get a metronome on so people can hear what I'm feeling as a downbeat. This is a good example of something that kind of begins as like a technical thing, but as soon as you're doing it, it's more like improvising or kind of feeling your way through it. So like,
yeah.
So like, so actually, okay, so right away we're into something. Probably some of your listeners have practiced the 2 against 3 thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2. So you kind of feel, or you could think of it as like a slow triplet. So I've got this.
Yeah, it's like a quarter note triplet, I think would be like the musical notation way of saying that. Yeah.
So I've got this kind of metronome going here. Maybe I'm playing. And double it. But then play shifting with these shift between the two. So like And then maybe as you go on in your practice, you spend some time in those feels, but then maybe you go into the 4 feel sometimes too. So like, just kind of playing with it. Yeah.
Yeah,
and then that
interesting.
And then that kind of feeds into how you might do things when you're rolling or when you're in single string style. And likewise, like if I'm practicing scale, back to that scale that we were talking about earlier, maybe sometime I'll be practicing like keeping it in that 6/8 feel, or so many playful things, cool. And any one of them takes a lot of work to really get used to it. But ultimately, once you get them ingrained, it's like it then just becomes kind of the way you speak, and it comes out later.
Yeah, I think banjo players are so accustomed to the solid stream of 8th note roll bass playing that it seems like leaving one of the fingers out should be easier and give your fingers some rest, but it's like way harder than just playing the stream of notes to like leave certain ones out here and there.
Totally. It's just whatever you practice. Like if you practice that way, then that's easier. And if you practice all stream of notes, it's harder to leave them out. Yeah.
Yeah. So everything that we've talked about kind of leads you to where you've ended up today, and you've had like some solo albums, and like regular listeners will recognize you. We profiled your first solo album. Is there a way that you would describe your playing style today, and what kind of things are you maybe working on today? Like what's your typical practice routine? And I guess you've already demonstrated a lot of it, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out like what you're into practicing lately.
Yeah. So definitely a lot of the stuff we talked about. And I mean, so I mentioned Billy Contreras before. I got a couple lessons from recently, and then I actually got to play on a gig with him. He came to and performed at the place where I teach at Warren Wilson College. So one thing we haven't talked about, but I teach in that department. I'm actually
Yeah.
I'm about to be chair of that department in the fall, which is wild.
Whoa, congrats. That's really cool.
It's kind of crazy. It's sort of big responsibility, but so that's happening. And I guess I'll just do a little shout out that, we do a lot with trad music there. So if people want to come study banjo at Warren Wilson, like it's a big thing of what we do. But anyway, Billy came and did a concert and I played with him, and he sent us these charts ahead of time. It was like really wild time signatures and tonalities. And so I've been kind of inspired to practice things in 5 or like, the scale that he uses, like, this is getting pretty esoteric, probably not of interest to most listeners, but he was using a lot of stuff from a harmonic major scale, which is like, instead of, you've got that flatted 6. But then if you start to make pentatonics out of it, you get these very pretty sounds, like maybe instead of your regular pentatonic, instead of your major pentatonic, get your, just to lower the 6th. And then actually, okay, so this feeds into a thing that I practice a lot. So you choose a pentatonic scale you like a lot, like let's say that one. And then actually, you know what? Let me just make it a major pentatonic scale so people can follow along a little better. So you have your pentatonic scale, and this is the thing I like to practice, like pentatonics are awesome and they're really cohesive. You choose 5 notes that sound good over a chord, and you're not going to go wrong because all 5 notes sound good over the chord. So you choose your set of 5 that you want for a given chord. But then a really fun way to practice them is to make them, so I'm on the first 3 strings. So let's just be G major pentatonic, so these notes, I'm doing them like, actually, let's start here. So I'm starting on this A note down here, 2nd fret, 3rd string, and then the B and D open. So I've just got the notes from the pentatonic scale right in a row. And now I'm just going to go up vertically on the neck of the banjo. So I'm just going to go to, so now it's and you kind of keep going up the neck. And you get, and then I'll kind of roll through it. That sounds pretty linear, but then what's cool is then you start to adjust it. So now instead of going, let's go, we'll skip to the next note in the pentatonic. So now I've got 2 open 2nd string, 2nd fret 1st string, and now I'm going to move those all up the neck. And each note is just going to go to the next note in the pentatonic, and you get, and you start to get very pretty sounds. And if you kind of decided for yourself already that those notes sound good over your chord, like any of these inversions work, and then you can get really sprawled out versions. Like, so now I'm going to be on the 4th string. So I've got my A note with my ring finger on the 7th fret, my B note on the 3rd string with my index finger, and G with my pinky on the 2nd string. So it's kind of a sprawled out voicing, but it's so pretty. Yeah. And so. It's really, really pretty sounds. The last one was not from the pentatonic, but yeah. So stuff like that. I love practicing stuff like that.
And I don't know if we ever mentioned, we should probably give like a sentence or two for people who aren't aware, like who Billy Contreras is, just to put in context the type of music that he makes and was demanding of you to play.
Yeah. So Billy, he's from like Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville, and people nowadays he plays with Ricky Skaggs' band. He was on some of the Bela Fleck, My Bluegrass Heart album, and he's been on some of those tours. He played with George Jones in the last band I think that George Jones had on the road. He's just like a jazz fiddle. I guess wonderkind is not the right word. He's not a kid anymore, but he was like a prodigy with jazz fiddle and contest fiddling and stuff growing up. And I think like there are these recordings of him at Mark O'Connor's camp when he was, 16 years old, like just doing unbelievable things. So he's one of those kind of people, who started really early, and he has this like tremendous focus. So he's just one of the musicians who I just am kind of continually a little bit in awe of, and have I always feel like I've got a lot to learn from.
Yeah, and he's not afraid to get like pretty far out either. He's
Yeah.
almost like the John Coltrane of bluegrass fiddle or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So yeah, he can be out there. Yeah.
And then
extremely talented.
And then at the same time though, like if you look up him playing with Skaggs' band, there are these videos of him playing Uncle Pen, and it is so fun to hear the way he plays Uncle Pen, because he manages to like he's real conceptual, and he manages to like plug in his concepts even when he's playing with Skaggs. So like it's not like he's doing these like really out note choices, but he's doing these subtle things that are anyway, it's very fun to hear. Yeah.
It's almost similar to what you described about Bela's solo on 9 Pound Hammer. It's like hearing dudes whose creativity take up more room than what bluegrass usually is, but then they're shoving that all back into a smaller box, and it's cool to see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So I guess, I mean, we already devoted a whole episode onto your first solo album. Tell us about the brand new one. And did this just come out, or is it not quite out yet? What's the status on this?
Not quite out. So the album releases on March 22nd.
So that might be just came out for when people might be listening to this, but it's very new, very recent, fresh music. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's it's all it's 13 original instrumentals, and it's with 3 of the same people from the last album. So Dan Klingsberg on bass, Nick Falk on drums, and Duncan Wickel on fiddle and cello, and then with the addition of Ella Jordan also on fiddle, who's this is like my dream team. So for me, just to get to play with these musicians is just incredible, and they all have so much. So they have so much personality that comes through their playing, and they're all the kind of musicians that like playing with them makes you sound better. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it just this new album, it's called Hidden Animals, and it's pretty eclectic. You know, I like to listen to all kinds of music, and I think when I write music, I'm just trying to create the sounds that I most want to hear, and find what are like my favorite sounds I can find on this instrument. The opening track is more like jazzy and a little far out as far as like, where people take into some of the solos. But then there's a lot of things on the album that are more just like, I was just trying to write something that sounded really pretty and cohesive and nice and contained, because we've been talking so much on this episode about this idea of improvisation and expression. But the other, I would say another pull for me that I just love in music, and I love it when it shows up in improvisation too, is things that are just they just feel so crafted. So like a lot of times I like a song or a tune that's like short, and it just feels like just the right little length. And for me, a couple things that come to mind, a couple examples that come to mind of this are certain songwriters I like. So like Margaret Glaspie has this album called Emotions and Math. And these songs are just like perfectly crafted in the production. And another songwriter is Dory Freeman, who's actually Nick's wife, and Nick plays drums and is producer on that album as well. She has this album called 10,000 Roses, and like, just these like perfectly shaped songs. So I think some of the instrumentals on the new record, some of them get into the improvisation and all that kind of stuff, but a few of them are just like, they're not like through composed, because people can take liberties in how they play their part. It's not like you have to play note for note the thing, but it's more about like the shape of a performance and the listening and interaction, and less about like taking turns on solos.
You know what vibe it really gave me was, are you familiar with any of like Brad Meldau's solo albums?
Yeah.
It gave me that same sort of vibe where it has like, it sounds free in a way, but it also sounds really concise, and there's just a vibe to it, and they play the vibe for a while, and then it's the next thing, but it does what it does like really well. I'm a big fan of his, and your new album kind of gave me that same sort of feeling.
Thanks. That's a huge compliment. Yeah, I love his music, and he's one of these musicians too, where like I just his touch, his tone, and his execution, it just sounds so nice all the time. And there's always that sense of listening. Like, so these musicians who I work with on the album have that quality too. But yeah, definitely I like that approach a lot.
You mentioned when you were talking about composing the tunes for the album, you said you just tried to compose what you wanted to hear on the banjo, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Would you be up for maybe like picking one tune on the new album and maybe talking about what it was that you wanted to hear on the banjo and then how you composed a tune to like achieve that?
Yeah. So let me think of, but yeah, let me play a little of this tune. I'm going to put a metronome just so you can hear the downbeat, because I feel like the melody kind of obscures the downbeat a little bit.
Yeah.
It's this tune called Low Roll, it's one of the tunes that, the name is just like for, banjo players, we play rolls, and it's on featuring a low string. So I called it Low Roll. So yeah, this is just like, it's a rhythm that I liked, and I'm really only fretting one note at a time. And it's just trying to carry it's just articulating a sort of a melodic rhythm that I like a lot, and keeping the banjo rolling the whole time, like how we like to do a lot of times, so like, a little out of practice with that one, but yeah, I mean, I think that's just an example of like coming up with the melody, like just sort of feeling it, do 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 do, and kind of thinking of a melody I'd like, and then just finding a nice way to put it on the banjo where you just kind of keep rolling with it. And that tune is kind of unusual in that it's got like I do a lot of things where I'm hitting my thumb like twice in a row, which I guess Crow and all these great bands, Scruggs, I think, would do that. And I think historically I've not done as much of that, but this tune kind of called for it.
Is that what you're doing on those those type of notes?
Yeah, let's see.
You're doing double thumb on that?
Right there, like,
wow, okay.
All the fast ones are just double thumb.
Interesting.
It took practice to get up to it, but
sounds like what you were saying is that you had that melody in your head prior to even trying to execute it on banjo, or that's how it started, was a melody.
Well, you know what though? Now that you say that, I'm realizing that's not the case. I think that was a kind of rhythmic articulation that I was messing around with on banjo. So no, it wasn't a melody that I fit onto banjo, but it was kind of like a certain kind of rhythmic syncopation and wanting to have a melody that had that kind of a syncopation
fit within it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. And I guess I'll go off on a tangent now, hearing you talk about double thumbing. I almost forgot to mention that you are one of the members in the exclusive club of 4-finger banjo players, are you not?
Well, I am kind of in name only. Like I do wear this pick all the time. but I hardly ever actually use it. Like there's a few chords in like a few of my tunes. Like that's a chord that shows up in a lot of Stevie Wonder's music, where it's like it's this crazy left-hand shape where you've got your.
It looks crazy. I can't quite see what the chord would be, but yeah.
So I've got like my picture. If you played an A chord at the 7th fret,
Yeah.
I've got that A and C sharp down with my pinky and ring. And then I've got the B string open, so you've got that kind of sound. And then I'm with my index finger, with like the side of my index finger on the E note on the first string. So it's like 7, 6, open 2. It's a really convoluted shape, but it's like a lot of these Stevie Wonder songs that are in major keys have that kind of a sound, and I just love that sound. So that's in one of the tunes on my new album called Castle Music, or there's like other voicings like that's less convoluted, like 4th fret, 2nd fret, open, 2nd fret. That's a chord that like jazz piano players would do a lot, and this is very pretty. So there's certain chord voicings where I want to be able to pick 4 notes at once, but I'm not coordinated enough to really pick with it as its own thing. And even though there's all these really cool things you could do with like this technique we all do, like that kind of technique, right. You could do like triple stops if you were clever about it.
Yeah, 3.
But I don't know. I just don't have my tone dialed in with it. So I really don't use it very much. Yeah.
Got it. Anything else you want to say about your new solo album before we move on? I mean, I definitely encourage people to check it out. It's, if you listened to the Heartlake album, it does kind of follow in that footstep, definitely an extension of that. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else to say about it. I mean, it's on Adjaropa Records, which is this really cool label that people can like look at some of the other stuff on there. I think they describe it's an artist-owned record label, and they describe themselves as putting out music that kind of doesn't really fit the categories that a lot of other labels have. So it's some interesting stuff on that catalog, including this great new album by. I'm trying to remember. Did you just interview Matt Flinner, or were you about Joe Walsh's album?
I would love to, but no, I did not.
I don't know why that was
spoken to Matt.
I think I'm thinking about the fact that he was at Banjo Summit. That's why I was thinking about him. But anyway, Matt Flinner plays great banjo on this new album by Joe K. Walsh that's on that same label. But anyway, that came to mind. I would just say all those musicians, like I don't know if people have heard of them before, but those people I mentioned who are on this album, they're all just such nice musicians. And I bet a lot of people have heard of Ella Jordan because she plays with Mile 12 now with the amazing BB Bowness. And Ella's just incredible. And having her and Duncan both on fiddle on some tracks is so fun. Like I love that thing of having 2 fiddles and then hear what their voices sound like trading phrases and stuff.
Let's move on to maybe tell us like what your main banjo is. I assume it's the same banjo that people will hear on the album as well.
It is, yeah, and it's a different one than Heartlake. So it's a TB1 with a Robin Smith neck, and it's if when you look at the neck, it looks like it would be like it was built for a top tension. But I ended up getting it because people buy trade necks and stuff all the time. So even though it's got that top tension style inlay, it's I've got it on a TB1, and Gabe Hirschfeld helped me find these. Someone has to name drop him in every episode, I think, but he's a great dude, an amazing banjo player. He helped me find the pot and the neck separately, and then kind of coached me through getting together with this guy, the amazing Chris Warner, who I'm sure a lot of your listeners know because he played with Jimmy Martin, is a great setup guy, neck builder. But Chris, helped get it all, helped fit the neck for me, and great instrument.
Is that a nerve-wracking process, investing in this like pot and this neck that you don't have a way of playing, and you just have to like have blind faith in a way that it's going to work out and you're going to like what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of money too. You're just like, well, I guess I'm just spending this money now and hope it sounds good. But I did have a thing, an advantage, which is that this pot, Noam Pikelny owned it, and he I can't remember if he's Artist Works or Peghead Nation.
He's Artist Works.
So on his Artist Works thing, he had a video where he's like demonstrating how you like messing around with head tension. So he basically sent me that video so I could hear what the banjo sounded like under his hands, which of course, no one could play anything and it's going to sound like an incredible instrument, but you could tell like it sounded really, really good. So, Gabe basically told me that, Noam had this instrument for sale. So I bought it from Noam. And then I ended up selling the neck that Noam had. And what's kind of funny is that the neck that's on here is one that Noam originally ordered. And for some reason, it ended up floating around, and I bought it from Jake Sheps and then had to have some repair work done because it was a little bit warped. So I guess I had it somewhat vetted that it would sound really good.
Yeah, cool. And I guess to clarify, if I recall, you had like a goofy neck on the banjo, on another banjo of yours, where it also looks like a top tension neck, but it's 24 frets, right?
Right. So
and this is not that?
This is not that.
Not that type of stuff? Okay.
So there is news with that, though. I still have that banjo. That's a Heartland banjo. Robin Smith built the neck and the pot as one thing. But I recently sent that neck to Chris Warner, and he converted it to being regular 22 frets. So that banjo sounds way better now that it's no longer that long. The bridge is no longer floating in the middle of the head, but it's in the regular spot. Right. And that banjo sounds way better now.
It's funny that we're talking about this because right when you were demonstrating those big stretch chords, I thought you had an advantage with your 24 fret neck when you were doing that, but as it turns out, no, you were really getting those on the same thing we're all working with.
I don't normally play chords that are that hard to play, but there are certain 4-note voicings that are just really nice to be able to play all 4 notes at once.
Totally. When did you get this banjo? You said it wasn't on Heart Lake, so this must be like a relatively new thing for you.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. I think the experience of recording Heart Lake, I was really happy with the album, and also like you make an album and you listen back to yourself and you start to notice things. And I think maybe it wasn't Heart Lake, maybe it was something different. Anyway, it was shortly after making Heart Lake, I wanted to get a banjo that just cut more. I think you know what it was. It was getting this new job in Western North Carolina and playing more bluegrass with people and just wanting a banjo that cut better through guitars and stuff. And this banjo definitely does that. So I guess I got it in fall 2020 or something.
And take us through the rest of your like gear preferences, whether it's bridges, tailpieces, picks, heads, all the geekery.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I just kind of asked Gabe or I asked, Wes Corbett a lot of times because, Wes always has such an amazing sound, like they both just know so much and have such great sounds. Like I'll just ask them for recommendations and tips and stuff. But so I've got the Pro Pick heritage picks, that people are talking about that Deering is selling. I am trying to remember who maybe Wes recommended these. I have a total junk pick on my ring finger. I mentioned how I don't really pick with my ring finger. I just have some like brass colored like 0.018 Dunlop pick on my ring finger. I don't know why. It's
soft.
It's like comfortable. I don't know why I don't upgrade that.
Yeah.
But then I've got for thumb picks. So actually Joe Troop turned me on to this. He was playing, probably all your listeners already know about it, but he was playing a blue chip like resonator guitar, like dobro pick, blue chip dobro pick.
And is that like thicker? Is that what makes it a reso pick?
Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know if it's thicker or just wider.
Okay.
But I tried his and it sounded really good. The only thing is that my fingers are like between what blue chip large is really big. So I'm too big for their medium, but a little too small for their large. So I have their large and I just put some moleskin inside of it. Like there's like adhesive moleskin on the inside to make it a little snugger on my finger.
Interesting.
The one thing I don't like about it is that there's metal on it that if you click against your index finger, it's a metal on metal click, which is louder than a plastic on metal click. So I've actually thought, and I even put a little bit of like sticker on some of that metal to mute that sound in case I do click, but I think maybe I'll put some very thin moleskin on there or something, but that's what I'm using. And I love the way they sound.
Anything else? I feel like we've covered quite a bit and learned a lot about you. Is there anything that you meant to talk about that we haven't covered?
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking back what we've talked about and how we're getting into tone now. And I think like when I was starting, I was really focused on notes and harmony, like notes at first, you know, how to play all the cool notes in your solo and how to learn all the cool notes from the recordings. And that never stops being fun. And then, you know, I think in college studying with people who are teaching jazz, it was like, how do I learn all the harmony stuff? Or how do I, you know, try to learn a lot of harmony stuff? And I think over the years, I've really just come to like realize that like one thing that transcends genre of music is the quality of rhythm and the quality of tone. Like, you know, whatever type of music you're listening to, probably your favorite musician, the way they place notes in time and the sound they get is probably a big part of why you like it. So I think those are things I've been focusing on more. And I practice rhythm stuff all the time. And, you know, I think tone is one of those things that I'm still hungry with. And we're all like that, you know, we're all like, well, you know, I can't swing. I'm not going to be able to afford like a pre-war flathead or something, but just thinking like, I want to keep on figuring this thing out for just getting that. I mean, I think we're all after that, you know, how do you continue to just develop your tone? And that's something I'm just still trying to figure out.
Yeah. Never ending. Definitely. Well, how about you leave us with at least any websites that we should check out to find out where to get your album, maybe to go see you play if you're performing around, all that business.
Yeah, so benkrakauer.com that's like you'll find all my tour dates on there. The Bandcamp, like just search my name on Bandcamp and you'll find the new album Hidden Animals and the old one Heart Lake. And it's not that old, but the other one. I should also mention I'm playing a lot with this band Zoe and Cloyd, which some of your listeners know because Bennett Sullivan, who's a great banjo player, he plays a lot with them, and I've been playing a lot with them recently. So you can check out their tour dates. I'm on a lot of that stuff, and in fact, actually, I've got a CD release show coming up that Bennett is playing guitar on, which is pretty fun. He's a great guitar player too.
Cool.
Those seem to be the relevant websites. If any of your listeners are interested in like, you know, Warren Wilson is a place to study banjo and other things related to, you know, trad music or jazz or whatever, you know, they can look up learn about the program on the Warren Wilson website.
Yeah. And you get to study with Ben face to face and learn all this stuff in way more depth.
And the cool thing about that camp is a lot of times it's just sitting outside, you know, it's like when the weather's nice, we just have class outside. So that's another cool thing about that place.
That does sound pretty nice. It's a snow day for the kids today out here. So, man, what a difference. All right, Ben. Well, thanks so much for your time and for talking about your banjo style with us. Great catching up to you and hearing about it all.
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of your show. So thanks for making it happen.
That's going to wrap up this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening. The song clips you heard in this episode were Brushy by Ben Krakauer, Twin Sisters by Doc and Merle Watson, Eurydice by Old School Freight Train, some Indian music from a YouTube video titled Chol Mini Assam Jabo, Basudeb Das Bal, and Friends. So I hope I didn't slaughter that name. Email me if you'd like a link to the video. Next, it was On Hold by Ben Krakauer, Lonesome Boy by Billy Contreras, and then Hidden Animals and Tidewater, both by Ben Krakauer. Thank you once more to Daniel Miller, that's today's Patreon supporter of the show. Head over to patreon.com/banjopodcast to support the show yourself, or email the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for listening. I will see you all next time.
dun 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 do 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 do. You know, do 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 do. Tuck it, tuck it, tuck it, tuck it, boom, get, boom, get.